There is a photograph taken on December 23, 1950. A cargo ship sits in a Korean harbor. On its deck, people, thousands of people, hid so tightly you cannot see the ship beneath them. The ship was designed to carry 47 crew members and 12 passengers. In the photograph, it is carrying 14,000 human beings. The man who made that decision was not a general. He was not following orders. He had, in fact, just violated every order he had been given. His name was Leonard LaRue. 4 years later, he would become a monk. He would spend the rest of his life trying to explain what happened on that ship. He never quite found the words, but he tried. The Korean War is called the Forgotten War for a reason. It sits between World War II and Vietnam in the American historical memory. Too recent to be mythologized, too old to be urgent. But in December 1950, it did not feel forgotten. It felt like the edge of something much larger. When the Chinese crossed the Yalu River, the fear in Washington was not just of losing Korea. It was of something escalating. The word nuclear appeared in briefings. MacArthur wanted authority to bomb Chinese supply lines. Truman refused. MacArthur kept pushing. Within months, Truman would fire him, but in December 1950, none of that had happened yet. By December 1950, the Korean War had turned. In October, Mao Zedong had sent 250,000 Chinese soldiers across the Yalu River. United Nations forces, mostly American, had been overwhelmed. They were retreating south. Fast. The retreat converged. On one point, the port of Hungnam on the northeast coast of Korea. It was December. The temperature was 20 degrees Celsius. The sea was the color of iron. The U.S. military had organized a massive evacuation of its troops and equipment. Ships were loading tanks, artillery, ammunition, supplies. Quote, the math was brutal and efficient. Military hardware first, then soldiers, then nothing else. There was no plan for the civilians, but the civilians had heard what was coming. 100,000 North Korean refugees had gathered on the beach at Hungnam. They had walked for days through snow. They had carried their children and their elderly and whatever they could hold. They knew what the Chinese army's arrival would mean for anyone who had worked with or lived near the Americans. They stood on the beach in the freezing dark and watched the ships load. SS Meredith Victory was one of those ships. She was a Victory-class cargo freighter, 455 feet long, built to carry military supplies. Crew of 47. Capacity for 12 passengers. Captain Leonard LaRue had sailed her across the Pacific with a hold full of weapons and jet fuel. His orders were clear: deliver the cargo, take. On military equipment for the return trip, leave. He had completed the delivery. He was preparing to leave. Then he went to the briefing. The U.S. Army briefing laid out the situation on the beach. 100,000 civilians. Chinese forces hours away. What would happen to them when the last ships left was not stated explicitly. It did not need to be. LaRue sat in that briefing and made a calculation. Not a military calculation, a different kind. His staff officer, Robert Lunny, remembered what happened next. LaRue walked out of the briefing. He did not consult his superiors. He did not wait for authorization. He said, I will take my ship in and take out as many people as I can. Just that. No speech. No deliberation. No paperwork. He had been sent to move cargo. He had decided to move people instead. LaRue was not a wealthy man. He was a merchant mariner, a working captain. The weapons he ordered thrown off the ship were not his to throw. The decision he made was not authorized. He could have been court-martialed. He could have lost his license. He could have ended his career in a single morning in a Korean harbor. He knew this. He threw the weapons overboard anyway. There is a kind of courage that operates in the absence of deliberation, not the courage that argues with itself and chooses bravery, the courage that simply acts before the argument can begin. LaRue walked out of the briefing, said 4 words, and started unloading the ship. His crew did not argue either. 47 men, none of whom had been asked, none of whom had voted, all of whom simply started doing what needed to be done. The question was how to fit 14,000 human beings onto a ship built for 47. The cargo that had crossed the Pacific was lifted off the ship and left on the dock. In its place, people. What LaRue had just done was, by any reasonable measure, insane. He had stripped a ship of its defensive cargo in a war zone. He had no authorization to carry civilians. He had no food for 14,000 people. No fresh water for that many. No medical staff. No heating in the holds. The harbor was mined. Chinese aircraft were active in the area. He was sailing unescorted. The ship designed for 47 people and 12 passengers now held 14,000 refugees. They filled all 5 cargo holds. They covered the entire main deck. They sat on top of the jet fuel, drums that had not been unloaded because the jet fuel was too dangerous to move quickly, and there was no time. 14,000 people on a ship, some of them sitting on drums of jet fuel, in a mined harbor in December in the dark. The cargo holds of a Victory-class freighter are not designed for human beings. They are designed for crates, for machinery, for the geometry of cargo. The ceiling height is not constant. The ventilation is industrial. There are no bathrooms for 14,000 people. There is no place to sleep. There is no place to sit that is not the floor, or someone else's shoulder, or the top of a jet fuel drum. The temperature outside was 20 Celsius. The temperature inside the holds, with 14,000 human bodies generating heat, was something else entirely. The crew, all 47 of them, moved through the refugees giving what they could, which was almost nothing. There was almost nothing to give. A crew member named Burley Smith described walking through the holds. He said the people were so tightly packed that if one person moved, everyone moved. The smell was overwhelming. The cold was overwhelming. No one complained. Not one of the 14,000 people on that ship complained. Lunny remembered that most clearly. Silence. A particular kind of silence. The silence of people who understood exactly what was at stake. They described order. No panic. No fighting. One trying to take more than their share of the impossible space. 14,000 people, in conditions that would have broken most groups apart, maintaining a collective dignity that the crew remembered for the rest of their lives. Lunny said it was the most impressive thing he had ever seen. He had been in the war. He had seen many things. He said the silence on that ship was the most impressive. He died in the monastery. Burley Smith, one of the crew members, was 20 years old. He spent those 3 days in the holds, moving through the refugees, checking on people. He said it changed him completely. He said he came home from Korea a different person, not because of the war, because of 3 days on a cargo ship with 14,000 people who had nothing left and asked for nothing. LaRue stood at the helm and pointed the ship south, 450 nautical miles to Busan, 28 hours at sea through a minefield. LaRue described the voyage in one sentence. He said, "With this cargo of souls, we steamed out to the open sea." Cargo of souls. He had carried weapons across the Pacific. He was carrying something else now. The ship navigated the minefields by moving slowly and carefully through channels that had been partially cleared. Partially. No one slept much. Somewhere in the cargo holds, 5 babies were born. 5 Korean babies, born on an American cargo ship, somewhere between a mined harbor and a coast in winter. The American sailors named them. The names they chose were Kimchi 1 through Kimchi 5. It was the best they could do. It was, in its way, exactly right. The ship arrived at Busan on Christmas Eve, but Busan was already overwhelmed with refugees. There was no room to unload 14,000 more. LaRue turned the ship around and sailed another 50 miles to Jae-in Island. He had been sailing for nearly 3 days. He had not slept. He did not complain either. On Christmas Day, 1950, the SS Meredith Victory docked at Jae-in Island. 14,005 people walked off the ship. The 5 babies were counted. 0 people had died in transit. 0. Not one of the 14,000 people who had boarded a ship in a mined harbor with no food and no heat and nowhere to sit had died on the journey. The Guinness Book of World Records lists it as the largest evacuation by a single ship in the history of mankind. The U.S. Department of Transportation calls it the greatest rescue in the history of mankind. In 1960, a special act of Congress signed by President Eisenhower awarded the ship the title of Gallant Ship, but by then, LaRue was not a captain anymore. 4 years after the evacuation, in 1954, Leonard LaRue left the sea. He joined a Benedictine monastery in New Jersey. He took the name Brother Marinus. Marinus is Latin for of the sea. He lived quietly. He worked. He prayed. He did not talk much about what had happened on the ship. When he did, he said the same thing every time. He said, "I think often of that voyage. I think of how such a small vessel was able to hold so many persons and surmount endless perils without harm to a soul." And then he said, "The clear, unmistakable message comes to me that on that Christmas tide, in the bleak and bitter waters off the shore of Korea, God's own hand was at the helm of my ship." He died in 2001 at the age of 87. The monastery where LaRue spent the last 47 years of his life was struggling. The Saint of the Pendant, Paul's Abbey in Newton, New Jersey had been a flourishing community. By the time LaRue died in 2001, the number of monks had dwindled. The Korean monks at Wagwon knew the story. Wagwon is a town that saw heavy fighting in the Korean War. When they heard that Saint Nt or XL more Paul's Abbey was struggling, they decided to repay the debt. Korean monks traveled to New Jersey. They joined the community. They helped sustain the monastery that the captain of the Meredith Victory had called home. The ship that saved 14,000 Koreans? The Koreans who saved the monastery. History sometimes completes its circles. Among the refugees on that ship in 1950 were the parents of Moon Jae-in, the man who would become president of South Korea. Among the estimated 100,000 living descendants of those, 14,000 people is an entire generation that exists because one man decided. The Catholic Church has opened a file on Brother Marinus. It is the first step in the process of being considered for sainthood. The ship was sold for scrap in 1993. It was scrapped in China, the country whose soldiers it had been fleeing. The South Korean government later awarded the crew the Korean Presidential Unit Citation. The United States Merchant Marine presented the crew with the Meritorious Service Medal, the Merchant Marine's highest honor, 46 men and 1 captain. None of them had been ordered to do what they did. All of them did it. The ship served in a couple of minor missions during the Vietnam War. Then it sat in Bremerton, Washington as part of the mothball fleet, forgotten, like the war it had sailed in. The Meredith Victory was a ship that held more than it was built to hold. It turned out that was also true of the people on it. The crew held more than anyone expected. The refugees held more than anyone could have asked. LaRue held more than one man should have to hold, and then he put it down. He went to New Jersey. He became Brother Marinus. And he thought often of that voyage. For the rest of his life, he thought often of that voyage. He said the word cargo a different way after December 1950. Cargo of souls. That is what he had carried. That is what he had delivered. That is what he spent 47 years in a monastery trying to be worthy of. History has a particular sense of irony. Not everyone got on the ship. There were 100,000 people on the beach at Hungnam. LaRue took 14,000. The mathematics of that is not comfortable to sit with. 86,000 people remained on the beach when the last ships left. The refugees who boarded the Meredith Victory knew, as they walked up the gangplank, that they were among the ones who had made it. They did not celebrate. They did not look back. They held their children and they kept moving. LaRue stood at the top of the gangplank and watched them come. He watched until there was no more room to watch, until the ship was so full that the question of capacity had become meaningless. 14,000 people. The ship held 14,000 people because LaRue decided it would, not because it was designed to, not because it was safe, because he decided. There is a number that appears in every account of this story. 100,000. That is how many living descendants are estimated to exist today from the 14,000 people on the Meredith Victory. 100,000 people alive in the world right now because of 3 days in December 1950. Because of 47 crew members who said nothing and started moving, because of one captain who walked out of a briefing and did not confer with anyone. LaRue spent 47 years in a monastery, thinking often of that voyage. He never knew about the 100,000. He never knew about Moon Jae-in. He knew about the silence in the holds. He knew about the 5 babies. He knew what he had decided and why. That was enough for him. LaRue was asked once why he had done it, why he had stripped the weapons, why he had taken the people, why he had sailed through a minefield with no authorization and no plan and nothing to offer 14,000 refugees except a ship and a captain who had decided. He did not explain his reasoning. He did not cite duty or morality or military code. He quoted scripture. "Here I am, Lord. Send me." That was his answer. The largest rescue by a single ship in human history. The decision, made in a briefing room in Korea on a cold December day, by a man who did not confer with anyone. 14,005 souls, 5 babies named Kimchi. One monk, alone in a monastery in New Jersey, thinking often of that voyage. If this story reached something in you, leave a comment below. Whose hidden story should we open next? Subscribe. We will see you on the next page of history.